I didn't care if her lineage traced back to the Mayflower or if her bank account had more zeros than a binary code. Because when Serafina Sterling stepped onto the dock my great-grandfather Arthur built with his bare hands back in 1902, the only thing I saw was a trespasser in 4-inch heels. She stood there, a vision of aggressive beige and chemically whitened teeth, screaming over the sound of the wind that I was violating the bylaws of the Emerald Bay Estates Association. The smell of her perfume, something sharp and obscenely expensive, cut through the scent of pine and damp earth like a physical blow, clashing with the sanctity of the wilderness just like her very existence clashed with the concept of decency. She waved a manicured hand toward the shoreline, where 32 identical, cookie-cutter rental cabins were springing up like a fungal infection across the landscape of my family's island, and she looked me dead in the eye, telling me to demolish my home or she'd bring in the bulldozers herself. 3 years later, I stood in that exact same spot, listening to the silence, watching her pack the last box into her trunk, because it turned out that every single one of those luxury cabins, the ones she built to fund her retirement, were actually sitting on my dirt. The courts agreed. The judge handed me the keys to her massive lakefront mansion, which was also, conveniently, on my land. And as I watched her drive away in defeat, I realized that karma isn't just a concept. It's a boomerang that hits you right between the eyes if you throw it hard enough. My name is Elias Vance, and this island in the middle of Lake Serenity has been the Vance family heartbeat since the turn of the 20th century. My great-grandfather bought 50 acres of untouched wilderness for a handful of cash and a handshake, back when this part of the country was nothing but trees and opportunity. 4 generations of us have bled, sweated, and loved on this soil, building a life off the grid, harvesting rainwater, and finding a peace that you just can't buy on Amazon. I'm a 54-year-old retired structural engineer, a guy who spent 2 decades building infrastructure in war zones where the ground tends to explode. So I came home 2 years ago looking for quiet, especially after my wife, Elena, passed away. Cancer takes more than just the person. It takes the future you plan together. This island was supposed to be our sanctuary, a place where we were going to build a retreat for veterans with PTSD, a dream Elena had sketched out on napkins 1,000 times, designing healing gardens where the old deer trails used to run. But instead of peace, I found myself in a war of attrition with Serafina, a real estate mogul who ran the Emerald Bay HOA like it was her own private dictatorship. She was the kind of woman who probably sued the sun for being too bright, a divorcee with a connection to the county zoning board that gave her more power than the mayor. She had a rulebook thick enough to stop a bullet and an ego that could eclipse the moon. The day she invaded my life, I was fixing the dock, the rhythmic thud of the hammer keeping the grief at bay, when I heard the high-pitched whine of a speedboat engine tearing through the morning mist. She stepped off that boat like she was conquering a new world, flanked by a nervous assistant holding a clipboard, and she didn't ask who I was, she told me. I'm Serafina Sterling, president of the association, and we need to discuss your noncompliance, she barked, her voice grating against the tranquility of the lake. I wiped my hands on my jeans, the calluses scraping against the denim, and just looked at her, realizing right then that she saw my cabin not as a home, but as a blight on her property value. She claimed my land fell under her new jurisdiction, citing some expanded boundary line that I knew for a fact hadn't been voted on by anyone but her and her cronies. She handed me a list of violations that included everything from the color of my roof to the existence of my solar panels, demanding $90,000 in retroactive fees and fines. Property law doesn't care about your sentimental attachment, Mr. Vance, she sneered, flashing a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. You have 30 days to comply or we foreclose. I watched her speed away, the wake of her boat rocking my small fishing skiff, and I felt that cold, familiar resolve settling in my chest, the kind I hadn't felt since my days overseas. She thought she was crushing a helpless widower, but she had no idea she was poking a bear. That night, I dug through the metal lockbox under my bed, bypassing the medals and the old photos, until I found the original deed from 1902, the parchment yellow and brittle. I went to the county courthouse the next morning, descending into the basement archives where the air smelled like dust and forgotten secrets, and I spent hours cross-referencing old survey maps with the new digital records. And there it was, a discrepancy so glaring it almost made me laugh out loud. The digital records, updated in the late 80s during a clumsy computerization project, showed my island as 34 acres, but the original survey, the one with the ironclad legal standing, showed 50 acres. Serafina hadn't just expanded her HOA boundaries. She had built her entire development, including her own personal mansion, on the 16 acres of land that the county computer had lost, but the law said was still mine. I sat there in the dim light of the archives, tracing the property line with a trembling finger, realizing that she was currently pouring concrete and framing walls on land she had zero right to touch. My first instinct was to storm into her office and slap the deed on her desk, to stop the construction and scream about justice, but then I remembered Elena's voice, the way she used to calm me down when I'd get hot-headed. "Wait for the mistake to become a disaster," she'd say. If I stopped Serafina now, she'd just tie me up in court for years, drain my savings, and probably win through attrition. But if I waited, if I let her finish the project, let her spend millions of dollars, let her fully commit to the theft, then the law wouldn't just stop her, it would hand me everything she built. It was a gamble, a high-stakes game of chicken where I had to sit silently while she destroyed my peace, hoping that in the end, the trap would snap shut. So, I went home, sat on my porch, and watched the barges roll in, carrying lumber and steel for the illegal empire being built on my inheritance. I let them build. Every nail they drove was a nail in her coffin. Month 2 felt less like living and more like enduring a siege, with the dawn chorus of birds replaced by the grinding roar of diesel engines and the beep-beep-beep of heavy machinery backing up. Serafina had gone full-scale industrial, transforming the pristine shoreline of Lake Serenity into a chaotic construction zone, with 32 cabins rising from the earth like ugly, beige tombstones. I watched from my window, drinking coffee that trembled in the cup from the vibrations of the pile drivers, forcing myself to smile, because every dollar she spent was technically an investment in my future portfolio. She ramped up the harassment, trying to break me before I could make a move, sending her private security, a kid named Kyle who looked like he'd rather be playing video games, to issue me citations for loitering on my own access road. The road, a gravel path my grandfather carved out of the forest, was apparently now an HOA scenic easement, and she wanted to charge me a toll to drive to my own house. I just took the tickets, added them to the growing mountain of evidence in my fireproof safe, and waved at Kyle, who eventually started looking at me with pity rather than authority. I wasn't idle, though. I was building a team, assembling a squad of specialists just like I would for a mission. I found attorney Jessica Vale, an environmental lawyer with a shark's instinct and a personal vendetta against overreaching corporations, and Old Man Miller, a property law historian who knew more about land deeds than the county clerk. We brought in Major Taggart, a retired JAG officer who could smell a legal loophole from a mile away, and together we mapped out the battlefield. We discovered that Serafina hadn't just stolen land. She was cutting corners everywhere, bypassing environmental impact studies and bribing the county zoning director, a greasy bureaucrat named Director Hargrave. I started documenting everything, setting up hidden trail cameras that captured her crews dumping waste directly into the lake, disturbing the nesting grounds of bald eagles, and ignoring safety protocols that would make an OSHA inspector faint. The turning point came when Serafina's own arrogance became her undoing. She was so desperate to fund the expansion that she listed the cabins for pre-sale before they were even finished, trying to get cash in hand to pay off the massive loans she'd taken out. That's when I struck the first match. I filed a lease pendens, a legal notice that screams to the world, this property is involved in a lawsuit. It's the real estate equivalent of a plague warning. Almost overnight, her buyers vanished. You could practically hear the sucking sound of money leaving her bank account. Panic set in. I saw it in the way she paced on the deck of her mansion, my mansion, screaming into her phone. That evening, Director Hargrave showed up at my door, sweating through his cheap suit, holding a briefcase that looked heavy. He tried to play the good neighbor card, offering me $250,000 cash to just go away and drop the misunderstandings. "It's a generous offer, Elias," he said, his eyes darting around like a trapped rat. "Think of what you could do with this. Move to Florida. Start fresh." I looked at the briefcase, then at the hidden camera sitting on my bookshelf, recording every frame of his attempted bribery. "I'm not going anywhere, Hargrave," I said, my voice calm, steady. "This is my home, and I think you're standing on my porch without an invitation." When the bribe didn't work, Serafina went nuclear. She hired a PR firm to paint me as the crazy veteran of Lake Serenity, spreading rumors on Facebook that I was unstable, dangerous, a threat to the community. She doctored photos, made up stories about me threatening workers, and tried to turn the town against me. But she underestimated the bond of small-town folks. The guys at the marina, the waitress at the diner, the construction crew foreman, a giant of a man named Hank, they all knew the truth. In fact, Hank became my best source of intel. He'd come over for a beer after his shift, exhausted and disgusted by Serafina's constant demands to cut corners. "She's making us pour foundations on wet ground, Elias," he told me one night, shaking his head. "She's skipping the rebar inspections. It's a house of cards, man." I just nodded, pouring him another drink. "Let her build it, Hank. Just keep yourself safe." By month 8, the trap was fully primed. She had finished the cabins, paved the roads, and installed the landscaping, sinking every dime she had and millions she didn't have into the project. She was leveraged to the hilt, banking on the sales to save her, but the lease pinned-ins had frozen her assets solid. She was drowning, and she didn't even know that the water she was drowning in belonged to me. I sat in my cabin, looking at Elena's sketches of the retreat, the sanctuary for heroes she wanted to build. The layout of the cabin Serafina had built, it was almost eerie. It was accidentally perfect for what we needed. Individual units, a central lodge, access to the water. Serafina hadn't built a luxury resort. She had built my wife's dream, paid for with her own greed. The court date was set. Serafina arrived with a team of lawyers who looked like they cost more per hour than I made in a year, confident, smug, expecting to crush the little guy. But as I walked into that courtroom, wearing my dress blues, flanked by Jessica, Old Man Miller, and Major Taggart, I didn't feel like the little guy. I felt like the guy holding the detonator. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with the humidity of nervous sweat and the buzz of local gossip. Serafina Sterling sat at the defense table, checking her watch as if this trial were merely an inconvenient appointment between a spa treatment and a power lunch. She didn't look at me. To her, I was just a speed bump on the highway of her ambition. But when Judge Harrison, a no-nonsense woman with eyes like flint, slammed the gavel, the atmosphere shifted from administrative boredom to high-voltage tension. Serafina's lead attorney opened with a slick, rehearsed speech about progress, property rights, and the nuisance of obstructionist neighbors, painting me as a bitter old man holding back the tide of inevitable luxury. He was good, I'll give him that, weaving a narrative where the victim was the wealthy developer. But stories don't hold up against geometry. When it was our turn, Attorney Jessica Vale didn't make a speech. She simply stood up and said, "Your Honor, we would like to present Exhibit A, the 1902 Vance family deed and original survey, and Exhibit B, a current geospatial analysis of the island." We projected a 3D digital model onto the screen. It showed the island as the county records had it, a shrunken, inaccurate blob. Then, with a click, Jessica overlaid the original 1902 survey lines, glowing in bright red. The gasp from the gallery was audible. The red lines extended far beyond the official boundary, swallowing Serafina's entire development, her boathouse, and yes, her precious mansion. Serafina went pale. It wasn't a gradual fade. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Jessica wasn't done. She called Director Hargrave to the stand. He looked like he was about to vomit. Under relentless cross-examination and confronted with the video footage of his bribery attempt, he folded faster than a cheap lawn chair. He admitted to fast-tracking the permits, admitted to ignoring the boundary discrepancies, admitted to everything. The judge's face grew darker with every sentence. But the final nail was Serafina herself. When she took the stand, she tried to cry, tried to play the victim, claiming she didn't know. Jessica looked at her cold and hard. "Miss Sterling, you are a licensed real estate broker, are you not? Is it not your fiduciary duty to verify property lines before breaking ground?" I relied on the county," she stammered. "You relied on a corruption you paid for," Jessica shot back. The verdict took 2 hours. It felt like 2 minutes. Judge Harrison didn't just rule in my favor. She threw the book at them. She declared the Emerald Bay claims null and void. She reinstated the original 1902 boundaries. And because Serafina had built on my land in bad faith, knowing there was a dispute and proceeding anyway, the judge invoked the doctrine of accession. The cabins weren't getting demolished. They were mine. The mansion? Mine. The damages for environmental destruction and emotional distress? $2.8 million. I watched Serafina leave the courtroom, not through the front doors, but sneaking out the side, her high heels clicking frantically on the marble, her empire dissolved into ink on a court order. She moved to Florida a month later, chased by lawsuits from her own investors. I never saw her again, and frankly, I don't care to. The transition was immediate. We took those 32 luxury cabins and stripped them of their pretension. We took down the private property signs and put up a new one, the Vance Sanctuary for Heroes. It took 6 months to fix the environmental damage, to clean the water she'd polluted, and to convert her gaudy mansion into a community center with therapy rooms, a library, and a massive kitchen where veterans could cook and eat together. Hank, the foreman who'd hated working for her, came back to work for me, leading the renovation with a crew of local guys who volunteered half their time. Now, I sit on the dock, my dock, and I don't hear construction noise. I hear laughter. I see men and women who have carried the weight of the world on their shoulders, finding a moment to breathe. I see a young Marine sketching by the water, just like Elena used to. I see a Vietnam vet teaching a kid how to fish. Serafina wanted to build an exclusive paradise for the rich, but her greed accidentally funded a haven for the broken. And that, I think, is the ultimate justice. She tried to steal my past, but she ended up building my future. But it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? In a world where money usually buys the law, how many people out there have lost their family legacy because they didn't have a dusty old map or the stubbornness to sit still and wait? Is justice something you get or something you have to take? Tell me what you think in the comments. Would you have waited 3 years in silence? Or would you have gone to war on day one? And do you think the system is broken? Or does it just need the right person to fix it? This is Elias Vance, signing off from the sanctuary. Stay vigilant, stay patient, and never, ever let them take what's yours.